They are the bravest people I've worked with.
Did the bravery of the Timorese give you courage during such a tumultuous time?
Absolutely. People have risked their lives and given their lives for the right to vote. I'm such a believer in that your vote is your voice.
Over 2 decades later, from her home in the United States, Debra Lee recalls the year 1999. At that time, she had served as part of the United Nations mission in East Timor and saw the sacrifices the Timorese made to vote.
They knew very well they would pay a heavy price for this freedom, and they were willing to pay it. There was a book on world's most dangerous places, and East Timor was listed in that book at that time.
Lee is referring to the effect of Indonesia's 24-year occupation of the small maritime nation located between Australia and Indonesia. It was then named East Timor and later renamed Timor-Leste. According to the government of Timor-Leste, when Lee arrived, the area had been subjected to rule by a succession of foreign invaders for over 400 years. During the Indonesian occupation, around 25% of the Timorese were killed. Social scientist Ariana Seminez grew up during that time.
When Indonesia time, you have to be quiet. You don't say anything because we're under oppress.
What was it like growing up under Indonesian rule?
When I was little, my parents, they have to talk something, even just about politics. They need to talk really quiet in their room. Even without the children here, because a children can be, what can we say, naive and say something outside what your parents discuss.
The Timorese were given an opportunity to vote in 1999 on whether to become a free country. The United Nations organized the election, and Lee was chosen to help.
When we arrived, the atmosphere was extremely tense. People were very fearful. They were afraid to really come out of their houses much. And in fact, just before we left, I had a horrible dream about being evacuated, and I saw flames around me. And that's exactly ended up what happened to us.
Lee said that an ambassador from the UN explained how helping the people of East Timor gain freedom was the equivalent of giving them their birth certificates. Lee kept that sentiment with her as she stepped onto war-torn soil in a place where she did not speak the dialects and had not yet been given foreign language assistance.
There were 6 of us who went to Manatutu, which is Shanana Gusmau's hometown, and it was an extremely dangerous place. As you can imagine, since he's a rebel leader and that's his hometown, it was closely watched by the Indonesians.
The UN workers had to build trust with the locals, and they had to do it quickly, but resources were at a minimum. Lee said that the only tools she had were a vehicle with a cassette player and a cassette tape. It contained a song with lyrics about peaceful voting and the importance of elections, plus a message from the UN Secretary General assuring the Timorese that the international organization would make their voices heard. Lee and other volunteers played the song as they drove into various villages. The Timorese slowly came out of their homes and gathered around to listen to the lyrics.
Everyone was singing that song.
When the time came to fill out ballots, Lee said that locals living in remote locations walked for many miles to reach election centers,
carrying infirm people with them. And in fact, at one point, UN considered postponing the referendum. When the Timorese heard about this, they were protesting to the UN, saying, we've waited years and years and years for this opportunity. We're the ones whose lives are at stake, and we want to take this opportunity and this risk. Even at our registration center, at one point, a militia group came through and they were firing weapons in the air, and they had ski masks on, and the Timorese were hiding behind us and were crying.
After the votes were counted, it was clear that the vast majority of them were in favor of autonomy.
Because you had the small pile, which was we want to stay with Indonesia, and the much larger group of ballots that said, we want to separate.
According to BTI, which analyzes developing countries, Indonesian troops caused more death and destruction as they were forced to leave East Timor. Lee said that buildings were burned to the ground, roads were left in wreckage, and water buffalo were decapitated with their carcasses laid out for people to find. Lee, other UN workers, and some Timorese had to flee the country.
We were told, grab your handbag, grab whatever you have with you. You're going now.
That handbag contained film, including this image of Timorese shedding tears of joy over the election results. Lee returned to assist the UN in helping East Timor transition to self-government. She saw a sign painted by one of the Timorese which read, "We cry for justice." 16 years after Timor-Leste gained independence, and Lee finished her work there, a group of young political leaders from the country visited the United States on a relationship-building mission. During that trip, they met Lee.
And I went up and I greeted them in Tetun, their mother tongue. And their eyes got quite large. And how do you know our language? And I said, I was there. And when were you there? And I said, 1999. Their faces went ashen a bit. And oh no. And this one young woman said, thank you. Because of you and people like you, we're free.
We have a living in a democratic country now. We have a free speech. We're doing progress slowly, but it's going forward. Timor-Leste is not only a young country, but it's a country that's full of young people. So what I'm expecting is to have a more better human development, to build the economic development in our country.
Saminez says her country wants to value their independence by remembering their history, but focus on moving forward.
We will promote the peace and stability. We're proud about our country.